I've just finished sketching a skeleton for a frame for like a mini Baja roll cage. Now please forgive the fact that this is so simple, but I hope that I can use it to show you the concept of how I can create custom frame sizes that might not be already available in the Content Center library. Notice I am in a part called roll cage frame, and that's just the skeleton. I probably should have called it roll cage skeleton. And I'm going to now go and do a new assembly. And while I'm in assembly, I'm going to place that frame, the roll cage frame, this skeleton. And now you'll notice that I have this skeleton, but I'm not in the skeleton part right now, but rather I'm in a assembly that this roll cage skeleton has been brought into. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, well, let's see if we can place some frame members. It looks like I have to save the document before creating a frame member. So I'll say, yes, let's save the assembly as roll cage assembly. Now it will bring me into this frame generator. And I could say, well, if I want to look at all the ANSI standard round tube, let's see if we can find round tube. Pipe is different than round tube. If I have pipe, I can select different pipe sizes, but these are nominal sizes, not outside diameter tubing. So I'm definitely not going to choose pipe. Rather, I want to go to the round tubing. I have round bars. Let's see if we can find the round tubing. Maybe there isn't any. Got rectangular and square tube, so it looks like I'm not listing any really round tubing that I can choose from. I could choose any of these other standards, but ANSI is the English standard. And instead of pipe, I'm noticing that I just don't have available to me from this Content Center library the tubing that I want. I want to use aluminum 1.5 OD by 1/8 inch wall tubing for this roll cage, and it just doesn't exist in the Content Center library. So I'll cancel out of this, and I'm going to go back here to the Getting Started into the projects. One of the things you'll notice, I'm in the project called ATV, and if I go here to Configure Content Center Libraries, I want to take a look at what libraries have been configured for me to use in this Content Center. And as I go down to the bottom, it shows that my library is the only one that's read-writable. In other words, I can create components and write it to my library. These other libraries are read-only. So make sure my library is selected. I think by default it's not selected. So make sure my library is selected so that you can write components to your library that you can use later on in Frame Generator. Okay, so once I'm finished there, I'll say done. Now I'm going to go, and I've previously modeled a little piece of tubing that's the size that I can purchase, aluminum 1/8 inch wall 1.5 OD. And I've modeled this, and I'm going to go into my parameters, and I'm noticing that this dimension D0 is the OD, dimension D1 is the wall, dimension D2 is the length. So I'm going to maybe give those a little more descriptive names. Instead of D0, I'm going to call it OD. Instead of D1, I'm going to call it wall. Instead of D2, I'm going to call it length, just so that I can refer to those a little bit more easily instead of having to remember the variable name D1, D2. Okay, so now I'm done with that. I've labeled those variables a little bit more user-friendly way. And now if I go here to, in this Manage tab, I'll see over here I can author different kinds of parts. And I can even author components, tube and pipe, connectors, and structural shapes. Now in tube and pipe, if I were going to send fluid through this and have some elbows and some flanges and some valves, then I probably want to author tube and pipe. But in this case, it's actually a structural member. So I'm going to author some structural shapes. And it requires a category. Let's put it under round tubes, the category of round tubes. And for parameter mapping, now I'm going to record some parameter mapping. This base length is the only required parameter that needs to be mapped. And in this case, it needs to be mapped to the length of that extrusion. So when I put this into a frame, the length will change based on the skeleton that I'm placing this on, the frame skeleton. I could also do some other, for instance, shape width. Maybe I want to map that to the OD, and the shape thickness, maybe I want to map that to the wall. So now I've mapped a few things, and I can now publish this. And it's going to change this part so that it is really publishable, and that's okay. I'll say okay. Where do I want to publish it? To my library. And let's publish it to this category of round tubes. I hit the plus sign just to make sure there's no subcategories, which there isn't. Okay, and these are the parameters I want to map to. Okay, so now here let's define some key columns that we may want to change as we insert this. I'm certainly going to change the length as I insert this into a frame. I might want some pieces longer or shorter. I'm going to certainly have the material, the thickness, and the width. Those are all things that it would be nice to be able to change when I insert that in. And I'm going to put these in an order that's a little bit more friendly if it were to be listed in a table. Usually if I'm specifying tubing, I'll give it the OD first, then the thickness, then the length. So I'll move that up in the list, followed by the material. Now let's click next here. Now it says, what's the family name? Well, let's make it round tube. And which standard do we want it listed in? Well, let's put it in the ANSI standard. Under ANSI. We'll click next. Okay, so now let's go ahead and publish this, and it was published successfully. Now if I go back to my roll cage assembly and I try to do some frame generator, let's see if I'm in the ANSI family, if I have ability. There it is. There's the new family I've created, this round tube family. Well, let's select a size. This is so far the only size I've set up is 1.5" by 1/8 inch wall. So now I can say, let's go ahead and place some of this round tube on my skeleton. And we'll say OK. Actually, it looks like I've missed a little curve down here. That's okay. Hit OK there. And it's building the tubing based on that custom size tubing that I just defined. And since I forgot this, I'll put some more of that frame right here. And say OK. Okay, so now I have some tubing, but notice this tube is embedded into the other tube. It hasn't really been coped to fit around the diameter. So I can do that. I could say either miter the corner if it was a mitered cut, or I could notch it, or I could trim or extend it, or I could trim to the frame, or I could lengthen or shorten it. So I'm going to, let's try a few of these. What if I said trim to frame? Let's see if that works. Here's the frame member, and here's the frame member. Let's see if that will trim it back as a coped. No, that's not the one I wanted. So let's undo that. Maybe it's a trim extend. Let's have this frame member be trimmed to that face. No, maybe not. Maybe it's the notch. Okay, first of all it says this is the frame member I want to notch back to this one. That looks like it did what I wanted it to do. It looks like it took that frame member and coped it around. So I'll use this notch to do the rest of these. If I want to take this frame member and notch it to here. Let's take this frame member and notch it to here. This one, notch it to here. And we could even do these. We'll take this frame member and notch it to here. So you can see the idea of how we can easily make some frame components out of a skeleton. So in summary, the first thing I do is create a part with just the skeleton. The next, I create an assembly where I bring in the skeleton into the assembly, and then I use this insert frame generator. And if I don't have the frame available, then I can author my own custom shape. So I have to model the custom shape as an extrusion, and then I can author a structural shape. And that's the end of this tutorial.